Hello, and welcome to episode 24 of the Medical Device Success Podcast and Videocast. I am Ted Newell, your host. I am also the host of the MedTech Leaders Community, whose purpose it is to bring MedTech executive leaders and sales and marketing professionals together so they can share resources and expertise, share best practices, give each other feedback, and celebrate successes, all in a platform that's unlike any other. You can learn more at medtechleaders.mn.co. Today's episode is about sales superstars. Where do we find them, and where do they come from? We find some of the answers in the Relentless Recruiting survey. Superstars in any profession are difficult to find, and many executive leaders are pleasantly surprised when someone rises up out of nowhere and becomes a top performer. Do you aspire to be a sales superstar? Or if you are an executive sales leader, do you wish you had more superstars? In this tumultuous pandemic environment, I'm sure you do. Let's dig into the survey. The reason we're here today is to talk to Kelly Clark and Barry Rogers of Relentless Recruiting about a survey they just conducted of life science executives and sales executives to better understand if there is an overall recruiting and hiring issue in obtaining superstar sales reps. How valuable are these superstar reps? And the survey also takes a look at where these stars came from, their initial skill levels, and the cost of making a bad hire. And I think as we go through this presentation that Kelly's going to take us through, both Kelly and Barry, I think it's going to lead us into some discussion and some questions that are going to be revealing. But the first thing I'd like to do is just get a brief introduction of the Relentless team that we have here. It's a much larger team than just Kelly and Barry, and also a little bit about the company. So Kelly, could you help me with that?
Yeah, Ted, appreciate you, first of all, having us. And so a little bit about my background. I spent, probably about 20 years in the medical sales space. Started off with pharmaceuticals and got into device sales. And was a sales leader for a couple of device companies. Then about 4 years ago, I started thinking about becoming a recruiter. And so I investigated it, and I knew there was something that was missing in recruiting from a leadership standpoint. So I decided to start Relentless Recruiting. And along the way, we are now one of the largest recruiting firms in the country. And Barry joined me about a year ago. And actually, Barry, go ahead and kind of tell a little bit about your background.
Sure. So I spent about 28 years in the medical device sales and medical device sales management and leadership, both in very high-end cardiology medical device companies. So all totaled in management at least about 14 years, and got to meet Kelly at one of those stops along the way, and so here we are.
Yeah.
Excellent. Very good. So you started this 4 years ago, and now how big is your team?
We have 6 recruiters and a few admin, and in the recruiting world, that's one of the larger ones. And so we kind of specialize in device sales, rare disease, genomic testing. And what's nice about our team is most of our team are former medical sales leaders, which is extremely rare. And I know that's a reason why we're successful, because we understand sales, where I'd say 99% of recruiters, internal and external recruiters, they've never carried the bag, or especially not been a sales leader. So so I'm very, 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 very fortunate to have a great team.
Right. And 4 years ago, and so that must have been when you started, did you just start by yourself, or did you start with a couple people? How did that work?
No, so I had one of my own recruiters that I've known for many years. He was a former sales leader, and he just kept on planting the seed that the way that I approached my hiring, he goes, "You'd be a great recruiter. You should think about that." And he kept just always bringing it up, and I got to a point in my life that I wanted to pivot, and I spoke to my wife, and she was probably the only one that didn't think I was crazy. That going from a great medical career with a salary and a commissions and going to straight commission, and so and really not making a dime for 6 months, and so that was something that I'm very blessed to have my wife, support me on this, and but. And I did have a mentor, John Seltzer, helped me break in and was my mentor, and actually he's part of my team now. So it's nice to have him on board, because he's the one that really helped me see that I could do this at a high level.
In addition to sales representatives recruiting salespeople, you're now also recruiting sales executives at a variety of level and even some high-level executives.
Correct. And what we really specialize, what we love to do is startup companies from the ground floor, the VP of sales all the way down. And we just recently got into IT software engineering. So we brought in an IT recruiter under house now. And so we're going deeper within our own accounts too. So pretty much we try to tell our clients if we can't recruit for you, we can find a recruiter in any space in your company for you.
Okay, excellent. Well, very good. Well, let's see. Let's move on to the survey, the presentation of the survey, and I can share the screen.
All right.
And here we go. So I'll go ahead and move to the, well, do you want to give a little more background about the origin of the survey before I start moving through the slides?
Yeah, just go ahead and go to the next slide. And I think that'd be what we were thinking when we designed this. So, what's fortunate about Relentless Recruiting, we sit around with a bunch of former sales leaders. And so we kind of suspected that there are some things that we wish we would have known as sales leaders that we know now as a recruiter, but we had to prove our suspicions. And so what we did was we designed a study, a very simple study, just to see if there was a problem throughout medical sales. So we sat there and we targeted 65 sales leaders. And we know most of these leaders through our years of being in medical sales. And there's a few we didn't know, but we know that they have a great reputation. So we decided to send the survey out of the blue to 65 sales leaders.
Okay.
And extremely humbled that we had 60 respond out of 65. So we were hoping for 40. And so we got 60. And as you see, there's a few, we have a couple of CEOs with sales backgrounds. We had probably about 15 VP of sales, probably 15, 16 sales directors, and the rest were first line managers. And again, all these are, I would say, the best of the best sales leaders with some of the best companies. So we fired the survey out and we waited for the response. And perfect.
Okay, Kelly, we'll move on to the next slide.
All right, great. So yeah, as I was saying, this slide is really the slide that a lot of people called me and asked me the answer. So I've been pretty tight-lipped about the answer, but it's exactly what we suspected. That if you have a team of 10 reps, how many superstars are on your team? And as Barry just mentioned, it was very consistent that 45 of the 60 sales leaders have 2 to 3 superstars. Now, I was speaking to a VP of sales yesterday, and he, I mentioned, well, it looks like any given superstar sales force, there's 30% superstars. He was like, we have 100 people on our sales force, and I don't think we have 30 superstars. I might have a manager who has 3 that answered the survey, but reality is we probably have closer to 15% across.
Yeah, I would jump in here and say that if there's an error in any direction on this, it would be more likely that there are less than there are more. When you take those 100 salespeople and now you take the 30 that maybe sales leaders, their own sales leaders said they were superstars, and you start comparing the 30, there's probably 15 or 20 that are still head and shoulders above the other 10 or 15. So,
And I guess the key part of this question is, from a percentages standpoint, if you have 10 reps on your team, how many? And so we're talking, from 20 to 30%.
correct.
Correct. And then also want to point out is, there's some sales leaders, one person came in and said they had 10 out of 10. Some folks have 6 or 7, and they actually might have the answer. So I want to point that out, that there's some people, and I pray that there are customers,
Sure.
but that's, and so if somebody's reviewing this and they answered, say, more than 5 superstars, we would like to dig in what they're doing that the others aren't. I think it's very, very important we can share that.
And these are people that you've probably helped with recruiting. So that would be another thing you could go back and look at more carefully is, how did you recruit for them? Who did you present to them? Who did think about who they hired, and so on?
Yeah, and we actually had one of our sales leaders, a couple weeks ago on a LinkedIn post, commented that Relentless Recruiting was able to, out of 10 top President's Club winners, we placed 8 out of 10 and 1 through 4 of those. So obviously very excited that we're getting that type of results, and very, humbled that we have some sales leaders that go out and limb and promote us as well. And if we can just move the dial, I mean, basically this is a report card of the industry. And 3 superstars is we all can do better. And if we can just get 1 additional superstar, we think it's worth it. Hopefully we get up to 6 or 7 superstars per team.
Sure. Okay. Should I move to the next slide?
Absolutely. Well, it kind of highlights what I was saying, what 1 extra superstar can do. And so the next slide was a question is, if you had any resource, you could add 1 thing. And so if you're in marketing right now, I'd close your eyes on this slide, because none of the 60 sales leaders think that, getting marketing material would be their first choice. But you can see that 82% would love to add 1 more superstar to their team. And that shows you how rare superstar. I thought when I designed this question, I put 50% additional budget. And I thought that would bring more sales leaders to pick that one. But as you see, 1 additional superstar is extremely valuable.
But of course, it is a bit biased because you're talking to people with sales backgrounds and a sales management.
Yeah, no doubt.
Okay. Yeah, because I would have thought the better marketing materials could have been a little bit higher, because if they're done right, they can be very valuable. But still, having the right people on the team is a huge deal.
Yes.
And in fact, my daughter's who is an executive in development sales, home development sales. Obviously, they read the book by Jim Collins. One of those books like Good to Great, Built to Last, whatever, where he constantly uses having the term or the phrase, having the right people on the bus.
Yep.
And so she says that all the time. Whenever I'm talking to her, well, Dad, this person wasn't the right person to have on the bus, so I had to let him go. And she uses this bus routine like 10 times in a conversation. But, having the right people on the team.
I love that quote. It's actually on our website. It's something that's to the effect that the people are great, but the right people is what matters on your team.
Yeah.
So, and that's true.
Okay. So now we're on the next slide. Time spent, superstars.
Yeah. So, there's no right or wrong answer to this. It just is one of the, just in general, how long does it take to identify if you have a superstar, that you hired a superstar? And as recruiters, we usually say, we won't know how well or how poor your hire is for 6 months. Obviously, we feel like, we had a true partnership with our sales leaders and with our companies that after a little time, they'll see that hopefully they have more superstars than poor performers. But it takes time. And, it depends on what industry you're in. You could be in rare disease where it takes you 6 months to find your first patient. And so it's hard as a sales leader to figure out if your rep is out there doing all the little things to be a superstar, or they're just hiding. And so you might be a device rep and going in and you have 3-4 cases on day one, and it's easier to identify that person earlier. And so, but it takes, I would say, it takes a sales leader probably anywhere from 8 to 12 months to figure out if they have a true superstar.
Yeah,
Do you agree, Barry?
I would chime in and say that of all of the questions we asked in the survey, this one probably has more variables, depending on the type of space, medical sales space the rep is in. You could have somebody that's an exceptional sales rep selling disposables in the operating room, but they're not on contract with their 2 biggest accounts, right? And so there's other things that can affect this. I think the takeaway here is that you don't determine that overnight. And so if it takes you 8 to 12 months, and then you land in a place where you think this rep's not going to make it, it's expensive. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute.
Right. And for listeners, people that end up listening to this as a podcast, I'm just going to describe this. And that is that the respondents, 23% of the respondents felt like it took 1 to 3 months to identify a superstar. 52% felt it took 4 to 12 months to identify a superstar. 23% felt it could take 1 to 2 years to identify the superstar. And then 2% thought it could be 2 years or more. And as both Kelly and Barry have said, the time it takes could be relative to the type of product, service, technology that they're selling.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. And I did have a sales leader tell me I like to give my, before I stamp a superstar, I want to give them at least one new quota adjustment. Maybe their first year, their quota is a little low, and then they end up getting a bigger quota next year, and they're able to accomplish that. Then that's how he validates a superstar.
Okay. All right. So we're on to the next slide, which is titled "Better Than Average."
So really honing in on superstars. What do they have that the average rep doesn't? Or what's their talent level? So all these traits are important. And so we framed this question to see if there was a pattern on, what ability a superstar has over the others. And we came to find out that it was obviously the drive and will of the superstar that separates them from their peers. And if you move to the next slide, I think it kind of shows a little bit more in depth about this question.
Okay. And for listeners, I'm going to say that the ranking the most important to least important characteristics, the characteristics that we have here that were in the survey were: the first one is strong drive and the will to be successful. The next one is critical thinking skills to problem solve. The third is ability to build relationships. The fourth is clinical selling ability. And the last one is experience from previous companies, which means training, call points, similar past products and strategies. And actually, the way I read these off is actually the ranking that the respondents gave, the importance of ranking that the respondents gave to this. So strong drive and the will to be successful was ranked number 1. So we'll go to this next slide, which then gives it a little bit more context.
Yeah, hones in on, and I actually saw myself back when I was a sales leader, and maybe some mistakes that I did, where I didn't really didn't wait weigh every aspect maybe the way I should have, and I'll explain that. So somebody's drive and will to be successful is important. And actually, when I was a sales leader, people would ask me as a candidate, would say, well, what are the top reps doing that the others aren't doing? And my go-to answer was, you just have to be relentless. And that's how I named Relentless Recruiting, is if you're relentless, you're going to be fine. But really, what does that mean? I mean, how do I identify that? How do I flush that out in an interview? And then also, if I am able to flush it out, are there other aspects that I end up cutting the candidate that maybe are not as weighted as much as somebody's drive and will? And so on this question, you see that 70% of these sales leaders, 42 out of 60, they put that as number one, will and drive. And so I'll frame it as, I think somebody's drive is their purpose. And then their will is their ability to handle adversity to accomplish their purpose. I mean, who doesn't want to be a superstar, right? But what are you willing to fight and do every day to become a superstar? And Barry and I had a nice conversation about this yesterday, and he brought up a great point as far as different reps that he had that, showed how much grit and the will to be successful. And Barry, I think you and I shared a rep.
Yeah, I actually, in our experience in the past, Kelly and I worked for the same company, and we were growing at a very rapid rate, and Kelly's region that he was managing got split. They started a new region. I came to build that new region, so I inherited some of Kelly's people, and we had a rep that he managed first, and then I got, and she struggled at first. And but when we found out what her passion was and what really her will, and the thing that motivated her, she was a nurse, and she was extremely focused on patient outcomes. And when we saw what she was willing to do every day, get up and drive 2 hours to be in another part of her geography by 7:30 in the morning, and just over and over and over again, we said, she's going to be fine. And then while I had her, I got to see her walk the stage at an annual sales meeting. So I don't know if it was my management ability over Kelly's, but either way, we both saw her the same way, and so that's one illustration of that.
Yeah, and what I didn't expect to have this question be so glaring, but really, what do you do with this? And if I was got in a time machine and went back as a sales leader, during an interview, I would design a lot more questions to bring out, somebody's will and drive. And then I used to give a clinical to the candidates and do a role play. And I think I unfortunately weighed too much on that. It's important. I mean, all these things are important. But if somebody struggled on their clinical selling role play that on a product that had never been trained, I would flush them out. And but before, if I went back in a time machine and looked at it, I would look at these questions and look at their critical thinking ability, came in second, in their drive and will to be successful. And I probably would have made some different decisions, because I can coach people on clinical selling, and then and so that's one area that I would tell managers, just double check your strategy and teasing out somebody's will and drive.
No, I think that's a really good point, because if they have the will, drive, and the critical thinking skills, they can pick up the clinical selling.
Correct. Yeah, and I would also point out that as it relates back to working with clients and recruiting, one of the biggest challenges we face is that the question here that finished dead last is the most important thing to so many clients that we've dealt with. In other words, you're talking to the client about an opening, and tell me what you're looking for. And what you get most of the time is a very narrow or tight profile, and we don't want to talk to anybody that doesn't check all of these boxes that mostly relate to call points and past products and strategies, and their experience and where they've been. And the way that I think in the real world that plays out is they're looking for somebody that they feel like can do the job pretty well and get up to speed pretty quickly, and maybe take advantage of some existing relationships that rep might have. The truth is, the person with the strongest drive and the will to be successful, it may take them a little longer on the training curve, but they're going to blow by these other people in the first year at some point and make the company way more money than probably most of the other candidates they were considering, if that makes sense.
And then we have this issue that you guys and I talked about in a preparatory meeting, and also in some emails that we exchanged, of large company versus small company. And I think smaller companies are trying to reduce their risk, because if you have 5 reps, then 1 rep is responsible for 20% of the sales, which is a pretty big impact on a small company. And so you have this chicken and the egg kind of a thing. Do I just go out and get somebody that is experienced, has the call points, has the contacts? Now, maybe you luck out and you get a superstar with that. Okay, that's great. But I think about the profiles I've written in the past, when I manage sales organizations, and you do end up, just on paper, there's so many more bullets that go to experience, and you don't spend a lot of time putting in the profile a statement that I'm looking for somebody with the will to succeed, strong drive and the will to succeed. That's the key number 1 thing. And so the profile ends up being deceptive, even though down deep inside, that's what you want. But that doesn't get expressed in the profile that you share with a recruiter.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and sales leaders also tend to, my experience, in a big organization, the higher you go up the food chain, you go from a regional sales manager to area director to VP of sales to et cetera. The higher up you go, it seems the more they deal in absolutes. So we hired somebody from that company 2 years ago, and they were a disaster. So we'll never hire anybody from that company again. And that is amazingly prevalent, and it applies to a lot of different things.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay.
And the other thing is, I'll tell you, best analogy is if you're a football coach and you're hiring a quarterback, you said, send me quarterbacks who can throw the furthest and run the fastest. Tom Brady wouldn't get an interview because he's neither one of those 2 things. It's between his ears what makes him successful. It's his will and drive. And a lot of times it's nothing more frustrating that we send resumes that Barry and I and the rest of my team, our sales leadership radar goes up going, hey, this person's special. They don't check all the boxes. Unfortunately, some of those folks don't ever make it to the regional manager because they're being blocked up front by the gatekeeper that's rolled out the requirements. And right. So that's something that's another area where now as former sales leaders, we see how the sausage is made, and there's a lot of issues that I think managers would be very interested in learning how we go about and find these top talented superstars. It takes a little time. It's not, we have a shelf full of superstars. We just open it up and grab a bunch. And unfortunately, there's a lot of recruiters out there that just post on job boards, and that's all they do. And same way with internal recruiters, they don't dive into these aspects when they're vetting their candidates. And again, I guess it just goes to show you there's not enough crazy sales leaders to leave their careers and become recruiters. So we see it. I think we're kind of unique in this aspect of identifying talent.
Okay. And before I move on, let's see what the next slide is here. Okay, so this is interesting. So the next slide is finding superstars. Where did the majority of your superstar reps come from? Go ahead.
Yeah, so, obviously I'm glad that it has turned out the way it did because we're external recruiters. And so that looks like we're 3 times more likely to find you a superstar because that's all we do. I mean, we were always on the hunt. We're looking. So that's if you're a sales leader getting some pushback by your company, but by not going out and using an external recruiter, show them the slide. And one thing that I also want to point out is I'm prime example is when I left pharmaceuticals and went into device sales, a recruiter found me, and I was definitely the dark horse candidate. And the manager that hired me stuck his neck out. And so anyway, he hired me, and I did well. And I was able to bring 2 other superstars to him that he hired. And so really, the company only paid 1 fee and ended up getting 3 really, really good, talented people that we all became managers later. And that's probably why the second graph shows that, the second place where superstars come from are from other current employees.
Uh-huh.
And so there's, and Barry, I know you see it. We place somebody and then at a company, and then 6 months later, we hear that person referred another candidate to the company, and that person got the internal fee, which is great. We're happy for the company, but it kind of shows you that it happens every day.
Yep.
So for podcast listeners, I'll just say that 5% of the superstars came from internal HR recruiters. That means recruiters that resided inside a company, human resources recruiters. 63% of the superstars came from external recruiting agencies like Relentless Recruiting. 20% came from sales employees. In other words, a sales employee referring somebody in saying, hey, you got to hire this person for this position that's open. And then 12% were others. So that is a very interesting statistic that you have there.
Another note I'll tell you, most of the time, external recruiters are paid on a contingent contract, which means that the company doesn't pay us, even though we can work for 2 months on an opening. If we don't find the candidate they hire, there's no charge to the company. So
Okay.
basically, what do you got to lose? Getting an external recruiter in.
Exactly. Yeah, because most of my hiring, when I was in a position of leadership in a sales organization, we always started with an external recruiter who would, go through a lot of resumes, a lot of searching, and then give us their top 5, 6, 7 people that then we would start interviewing. So very good. Okay.
And to that point, I will tell you that we're very fortunate to have some great internal recruiters that we partner with, and we're true partners. And I kind of equate it to it's a relay race where when they call us, they hand the baton over to us, and we start running for them. The companies that seem to run against us, their internal recruiters are trying to find the candidate at the same time. Mm-hmm. That does pose an issue. And so
sure.
we try to avoid situations like that.
Sure. Okay. Should we take a look at the next slide?
Absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay, so this one, the question is, what makes a superstar rep? And it's focusing on the superstar reps you hired. Did they have the strongest background when you interviewed them?
Barry, you want to
Sure.
chime in on this?
Yeah, I'd be glad to. I'm going to beat this drum a little bit again, but overwhelmingly, the majority of the direction we get when we're getting ready to start work in an opening is we want these people to have all these experiences. And as you can see here, 70% of the 60 wanted reps that have some solid backgrounds, or their superstars had some solid background, but most did not have all the qualifications they needed and needed to be developed. But they had the will to succeed and the strong drive and the tools to do it. 13% didn't have the ideal background or qualifications, but won the job through the interview process. So I've hired people like that. I've also probably passed on people like that I should have hired. So anyway, Kelly, I don't know if you want to add something else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And when I think of this, is they didn't check all the boxes and that were required. And I'm sure a sales leader stuck their neck out And I've hired some folks, especially when I was in device. I would hire pharmaceutical reps, even though there's a lot of companies that for a reason they think that just because you're on one side of medical sales, you can't do the other. And I was living proof that I made the leap, and it was my will and drive. And so I would find others. And so at LiveSell, when I was a sales leader there, I'd say half the sales force came from pharmaceuticals, and they were extremely dominant. That company's got bought out 3 times, and so it's still just a dominant force in the space. But if they passed on pharmaceutical reps or reps with different backgrounds, I don't think they've ever been as successful as they were.
Sure. And I look at this and I think about some of the hires that I made, and it's this whole thing. You're in the recruiting process, you're in the interview process, and the first day of interviews, you might have, let's say you had 5 candidates, and you have somebody that after that first day, you sort of have them ranked, and these are just the introductory interviews, maybe 3rd place, which qualifies them for a second round, perhaps. And but it's because they haven't checked all the boxes. They did really well in the interview, but you're still sort of working off the boxes, what's been checked or not checked, past experience, and so on and so forth. But then you get into that next interview, or you get into checking references, and suddenly new information starts to come out, and that person then ranks second. Then suddenly they're in first place at the end of the whole process, and you're somewhat surprised, and you're like, wow, this person really came through. And like the interview, like a reference check question, which everybody gives you a couple doctors for reference checks, right? Or at least in my experience, they did. And so you call a doctor up, and the first thing the doctor always says is, oh yeah, Joe is a terrific guy. He was really good in the office. Everybody liked him, blah, 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 which sounds like an endorsement. But then I would say, well, you have a lot of people calling your office. You have a lot of reps calling your office. And if you think about the persons or persons that you and your staff look at as really the most professional reps that come into your office on a scale of 10, and that person's a 10, where would you rank Joe?
Yep.
And wow, that really knocked some people out of contention. They were ranked. They would give them a 7 or 8, and in my mind, they're being nice, which means they're really a 6 or a 7. And I'm like, that's not the person I want. So it's interesting how certain things, if you do it right, can bring these superstar reps to the fore. Well,
yeah, we talked about this. I'm sorry, Kelly. Go ahead. Okay. Well, we talked about this yesterday for a little bit. The question that I used to love to ask is, what did you do to prepare for this interview? And the rep that's over here in the 17% column that checks all the boxes, very often their attitude is, oh, I'm familiar with the company. I mean, I knew so-and-so, and I did go look at the website. The rep that didn't have the ideal background or experiences, that rep that comes back to you and answers that question with, I spoke to these 3 doctors, I reached out to this person and this person, and did a litany of things above and beyond to prepare for the interview. That person told me how they were going to prepare to go manage their territory every day. And that was a big thing for me when I was trying to flush out who might be a superstar.
Yeah. Okay. Kelly,
I'm about to say is, when you're looking at somebody's resume, I always thought, we're going into business together. It doesn't matter if you're going into medical sales or opening up a Subway sandwich shop. Does this person resume make sense on why they made a move? And some people are like, oh, there's too many hops on a resume. Well, did each move make sense because they're trying to develop their career? And sometimes opportunities come at bad times. You have to make a decision. When I got out of the military, Pfizer was the only company that had any interest in me, so I was very fortunate to land with them. And I went from making very little money to making a comfortable living and providing for my family. So there's no shame, but it was funny when I was interviewing for device companies, some of them just passed on me because I didn't have OR experience, and they honed in on me being in pharmaceuticals. And I was like, that was the best job that I could get. And I loved the job, and that was a great company, a great experience, and there's no shame. And so it really boils down to is, yeah, did I wish that a device company would have hired me right out of the military? Absolutely. But I got to where I was going to get to through hard work and keeping my eyes and ears open.
Absolutely. And big companies also can be great training grounds. They have all sorts of resources.
Correct.
I think a big company is a great anchor to a resume.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That's,
okay.
all right.
So on to next slide. So what is the cost of a bad sales hire? So this is interesting. This is an interesting slide because we're talking about trying to find superstar reps. But what if you don't look for the will to succeed and the drive and the critical thinking skills, and you end up with somebody that's mediocre or just not that good? What is the cost?
So let me kind of give you the background why we framed this question. Because when I'm a recruiter, I might have an HR person call me, and they're asking obviously why we're different than other recruiting firms. And I try to explain the cost of a poor hire. And that unfortunately goes in one ear out the other ear. And so I was searching for information about this. And so Dr. Smart wrote a book called Top Graders. He looked at this. And I started kind of teasing out what he was, looking at cost. And I started thinking about my own poor hires. And I had a poor hire that turned one of my territories into, it was a $4 million territory into a $2 million territory within about 6-7 months. And
Wow.
So on the way out the door, I found out that he lost one of our key hospitals too. And so that was another couple of $1 million. Took us about 3 years. So I know personally it's super expensive. And sometimes companies don't really look at acquisition costs to pay for recruiters to reduce the overall cost of a poor hire. And so that's where this question came from. And that's
Okay.
what but again, it was more of a theory. And as you see, most of the sales leaders think that, $560,000 is about right for a poor hire. And then there's some that are over 700,000. Me personally fall in on the higher side, my experiences. And it really depends on how large your company is. One of the sales leaders told me that he put the 350 because he's with a startup and most of his reps have less than $1 million quota. So it definitely predicates on your company and the quotas. And because when I have a poor hire, it hurts more for a startup, even though they lose less money per capita, but it's very painful. And we can't afford to make too many bad hires.
And just for the podcast listeners, when you think about what's included in the cost of a bad hire, it would be the rep's compensation, the hiring costs, decreased sales, opportunity costs to grow sales, and then disruption costs. And the whole area of disruption, that is a huge cost because if it's their personality issues, and in addition to poor performance, other reps do not like to be in the company of somebody that doesn't perform or somebody that seeds discord in a company. That brings them down too. They don't want that. They want to be, soaring with eagles, so to speak.
You're spot on. And I would also just, echo is nothing's more miserable as a sales manager weeding a poor performer out. And what's happening is that poor performer is poisoning the well with the customers. They're poisoning the well with their peers, and they're trying their best to take some more people out with them. And so that's, and we do have some solutions we'll talk about that we can hopefully help some of these sales leaders with that stress and burden. And HR, to their credit, they're making sure that they're not, terminating good employees. And there's another reason why they require so much documentation is because if you get rid of too many employees, it affects your unemployment insurance. And that's what Dr. Smart didn't talk about on his analysis is unemployment insurance. But we all pay it as companies, but if you terminate enough employees, your rates go up. It's almost like car insurance. The more accidents you have, it's going to go up. So not only are you going to lose $560,000 on a poor hire, you're going to get a tax bill for an extra 2 to 3% the next year, which if you're a $100 million a year company, it could be $2 to $3 million. So I just envision this boardroom with you terminate 10 candidates or 10 hires that year, that's $5 million right there. And then you put in a couple $1 million and you just set it on fire. So
Yeah.
it is super expensive. And unfortunately, I don't think some people give it the respect that it deserves.
Okay. All right, so let's move to the next slide. That's sort of a segue. So this also is, the next slide is time spent poor hires. How long does it usually take to determine a poor hire?
So if you're fortunate, and there's some of my past hires, exposed their, incompetencies faster than others. And I also will mention that a lot of poor hires are great people. They just happen to be in the wrong profession. Yeah. And so I don't want to demonize, and that's what's hard for sales leaders is trying to figure out if you can coach them and get them up to speed. And then, so that takes time, so and really, if you use that 560,000 as your barometer of a poor hire, that's about $40,000 a month that, every month you keep a poor hire on, you're losing. And so and there's a lot of managers that, they have to wait till their new hire gets through training. And then, as an earlier slide, there's a lot of different dynamics with medical companies. It could be rare disease. It's a long cycle, capital sales, devices. And so just because you identified somebody a year down the road, that could be extremely fast in your industry. Versus maybe a device manager identifies somebody about 4 or 5 months. And so let's just say, I'd say for argument's sake, the number is probably about 8 months that you really know that you have a problem.
Yeah, I would probably agree with that because, if you have a well-defined sales process that everybody's agreed is effective, for your products, maybe there's a different sales process for different products that you have in the portfolio of a company, you can at least also start seeing that somebody's not really following the sales process. They're resisting it, even though it's been proven. And that could be your earliest sign. But yeah, I would probably agree that it takes that time to be in the field, to work with people, to evaluate what's happening, to see, and what's not happening. So.
And I'll also say that we have clients that hire multiple recruiters at once, different firms. And it definitely is a bruise to our ego when a company or a hiring manager hires a candidate not from Relentless Recruiting, from another company. And the back of our mind, I'm thinking about this slide, is like, did you go too fast? I hope you made a great hire, because I know how painful it is to make a poor hire. But don't judge your search firms by the speed, because you should be judging your search firms by the results. And I think, and I ask my own customers to review the folks that we place with them so we can get better and come up with better strategies. But I can tell that's a very foreign concept with a lot of sales leaders.
Right.
And so don't think about speed, think about quality.
Yeah, there's another aspect to having, the idea is pretty simple to get your head around. The more people I have looking, the quicker I'm going to get candidates. right, to talk to. But the truth is if you have Kelly on the phone with a candidate who's explaining the opportunity and trying to make the candidate understand that this looks like a really nice next logical step in your career and gets them interested in the opportunity, he's relying on 20 plus years of medical sales leadership and his understanding of the space versus maybe another recruiter who's focused on getting as many resumes over as they can just to get a fee. So, and they may not manage that conversation correctly and the candidate's not interested even if they find them. But once they've talked to them, then we're off limits. So they don't belong to us. They're going to say, we've already talked to somebody else about this and I wasn't interested, or I got submitted. But either way, it's kind of a race that gets messy.
Right. Well, it's talking about, companies are involved in so much quality control about every other aspect of their business. If they're, ISO 9001 or 13485, medical, so that they can sell a product overseas and in the United States. So they just need to apply a quality process to the recruiting.
Agreed.
Yeah.
Agreed. Yep.
Okay. So let's see here. Let's move on to the next slide. And this one is junior reps, because you're asking about what you call a junior rep, and what is your overarching opinion regarding junior or / sales associate reps? Define for people what a junior rep is or a sales associate rep.
Yeah. So, and I'll tell you why I put this question as well in this questionnaire is, so an associate, sometimes called junior rep, in theory, you're hiring a candidate with probably very low experience in medical sales.
For less money.
Maybe a B2B rep that's outside and they're breaking into medical sales. And so there's, in theory, just say you have a high performer in Dallas, Texas, and that person's quota is $5 million. But that rep is being tied down with more admin responsibilities because of how busy they are. So they hire a junior rep to come in and mirror that territory and basically do a lot of the servicing, not really the selling part, but a lot of the servicing, which allows free time for the true sales rep to go out there and drive more sales. And so as time goes on, the hopes is that the junior rep gets the experience they needed. They know about the products, and then they expand Dallas into two territories. And now you have somebody that's plugged and play, where they know the customers, they know the product, and they know the processes. So again, sounds like a great idea. But throughout my 4 years of recruiting, I keep having VP of sales ask me my opinion. And so I can only relate on my own experiences. When we had junior reps, it was not even really a coin flip. It's probably 25% of the time I could groom a junior rep into a really good territory manager. Most of the time, they were pretty limited, and they hit their ceiling. And it could be a will and drive scenario, but you couldn't get rid of them because they were doing their job. And then they would get upset because you wouldn't promote them, because you would go out to free agency during an opening and find a rep that has a lot more depth and ability. And so, I brought this. I do have customers that are trying to bring in entry-level people, train them the way they want to, and then have them all become sales reps with their company. And
so if we're reading this, the response of the respondents, what you see here is that 47% of the respondents say that 50% of the junior sales associate reps become great, in other words, superstar sales reps. And 42% of the respondents said that 25% of the junior sales associate reps become, superstar reps. So those are pretty good percentages. And so, but it goes back to the value of making a good hire in the first place, good training, and so on, and to make sure that this person can see their potential.
It could be a trap for sales leaders that they feel like somebody did a pretty good job as a sales junior rep, that they deserve to get promoted.
Yeah, it's
and
true.
what happens is they water their sales force down when they should. It should be a competition, and you should bring in the best of the best candidates. And your number one job as a sales leader is hire well, right? And so, but there's a loyalty, and I completely understand the loyalty of trying to promote somebody, but you might be doing yourself a disservice long term.
Sure. All right, so we can let's move on to the next one. Here we go. So trialing new hires. And so the question is, if you could terminate a new rep up to 12 months after hiring for any reason, and that is without any repercussions, how valuable would you find this tool or so-called trial period to be?
Yeah, so basically, if you're a sales leader and you're 6 months into hiring a new hire, and you're like, this person is going to be average at best, and it's probably below average, then what you do is you bubble that up to the VP of sales, and you explain it was a bad decision. You usually blame the outside recruiter, which it comes with the territory. And
Sure.
but what happens is it's not that easy to terminate somebody, because HR wants the documentation, and this is where all this starts unraveling, and it's a huge time waste. So why I asked this question is, wouldn't it be great that you could just terminate who you want to terminate and then replace them as fast as you can, and just build a really strong sales force? And we always used to say, the sales force strength is only as strong as the weakest link of that sales force. And so what we've been doing at Relentless Recruiting, we've been thinking about solutions. How can we help? And we just signed a contract that will allow us to offer contingent salespeople. Some people call it contract sales reps. And I want to define that real quick. Is a contingent sales rep gets full benefits. They get 401k, they get insurance. The only thing different is their paycheck is not the company they're technically servicing. And so pharmaceutical companies use contract sales reps. It has a negative connotation to it. They're kind of like JV reps, but in reality it's a growing industry, and I see the value in it now, where you have higher skill set people, especially during COVID time. They'll take on a contingent role for a company. That allows the hiring manager, they tell us, hey, Kelly, give us 6 months trial period, and we'll move them over into a W-2 for us, not for you. And so it's as simple as a phone call. 4 months into it, they're like, Kelly, we made a bad hire. Let's find somebody else. We can cancel the contract. And so it doesn't affect the unemployment insurance for that company. It affects our unemployment insurance. And so I think it's a handy tool if used correctly. We just talked about the junior sales rep. Maybe that's a good starting point, given the likelihood of that junior rep becoming a superstar. And
Right.
so
Right. So in this graph, 65% of the respondents felt like it would be a tremendously valuable tool. 22% thought it would be marginally valuable, and 13% said it would be not valuable. So majority of people felt like it could be a valuable tool used correctly.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I'll make one point here. I was at a company where we were about to start doing this, and the only reason I wasn't a fan of it is because as the sales leader responsible for that quota for that region, I was going to be giving no input on who they sent me. And so we wouldn't do it that way. I'd like to clarify that. We,
Okay.
we'll send you 3 people. You tell us you don't like any of them, or you like one of them, or we're gonna keep doing it until you like somebody.
Right.
I'll give you an example. A startup company, they hired their first 100 sales reps all on contingents. And then at 6 months, they brought the ones they wanted over and went and hired other folks. They were able to identify the right type of rep they wanted, and they were getting into a new space. So startup companies can find a lot of value in this. And the other aspect of it is, I was talking to a commercial sales operator, and he said it looks really good on paper for startup companies that have their sales force as more consultants, not as hard costs that they're W-2s. And so they're able to raise more money, and they can throttle their sales force faster or slow it down. And that's why, like pharmaceutical companies, you think about it, is when their drug is about to run out of patent, they'll shift their W-2 employees to a different division in that company, and then they'll hire contract reps to run out the patent for 2 years. And the reason why is when they cancel those contracts, it doesn't affect their unemployment insurance, which could be millions of dollars each year for that. So it's there's a reason. If people want to understand it more, give me a call, and I'll be able to figure out if it's a right fit for your company.
And the way this is done, so let's say it's a small startup that is just gotten some like B or C round financing. It's going to allow them, it's a medical device, maybe a capital device. It's going to allow them to put 5 people on the ground, to get started. So a small team like that, you could help somebody with a small team of 3, 5, or 10 reps?
Absolutely. We have the ability now to go up to probably, we have 500 million in backing. So and that's just with one of our sources. So we can scale it up from 1 person to 500. So it's exciting. We're excited, and the survey just compounded our interest in expanding into this contract. And I think that's something you'll see moving forward, especially in the COVID, because you think about all the people who've been severanced, their unemployment insurance is going to go sky high next year. Just it doesn't matter. And so you'll see this be a big push.
Now, in this particular case, so let's say somebody has used your service and they've hired 5 reps. Are they then managing the reps and, training them, doing all that? They're just not doing the HR side, which is paying them, benefits and so on, which you do? Or does Relentless get involved at all in the management of the person, the actual performance management?
Yeah, so great question. So the rep is being trained by the host company. And the manager of that medical company is supervising the sales rep. However, when it comes to performance issues, coaching, like performance plan or something, that goes over to us, where we'll have a liaison manager to manage that person. And that's what, people are familiar with pharmaceuticals. I know there's some big device companies that are doing it as well, but there is a liaison, and that's brought in to help coach up poor performers. And then if you can't coach them up, and then obviously you're going to have the severance of the contract. Now, candidates were like, well, I don't want to sign up for a contract role knowing that you can terminate it. And we just say, well, if you're a poor performer, it doesn't matter if you're W-2 or contingent, they're going to let you go anyway. I mean, so right. It's just, if you're a top performer, you're going to make the same amount of money that you would as a W-2 for them. And there are clients that actually liked how this is set up, and there's sales reps that like it because they get actually better insurance. The entity that we are working with has 60,000 contingent employees, and so the insurance is phenomenal.
Right. Yeah, I would imagine it's possible that they'd end up with better benefits in your program than they would for a
They
small.
would.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Absolutely.
All right. So the next slide, is this our final slide? Yep.
This is it.
There's one more slide, I think, just the team, and but yeah, that's pretty much, we're at the end of this.
So talk about Jim Collins. Here you go.
There we go.
People are not your most important asset. They're the right people are. Jim Collins, author of Good to Great. Absolutely. So, and then we have a who we are and why you should know us slide. It's a nice picture of the team, and reinforces the fact that you're one of the largest medical sales recruiting firms in the United States. Excellent. That's really terrific. Okay, so I'm going to stop the share and come back to the three of us. And I was just looking over the questions that I had down. We addressed, let's see, some of these. Let me make sure. We addressed some of these. The questions: how do you essentially reveal this will to succeed, this drive, and also the critical thinking skills? Those were a couple of questions. We talked a little bit about that. Any further thoughts on, sorting out if people have these skills?
Yeah, I'll chime in real quick. Is one of the best, I guess, tools a former manager who helped me develop into sales leadership. He said, look at somebody's resume, and when they first took on a job, and hopefully they won President's Club the first year, then maybe they won President's Club the second year, and then they got rolled up into their quota, and maybe their third year wasn't a President's Club year. And then the fourth year, there was another President's Club year. Hone in on that third year, because that shows they didn't quit. They had a big quota, and that shows that their ability to handle adversity. And then ask them what they did. You try to get in their mind, and versus there's some sales reps that are really good picking up low-hanging fruit. And once they get a real quota, they haul butt to a different company. And so, but that you're trying to get inside their mind and ask them specifically, what did they do that third year to get them back on top on the fourth year? And unfortunately, a lot of great superstars don't realize they're superstars. And so it's amazing. So that's just a little trick of the trade, or ask them, what's the hardest goal you ever accomplished, and sit back and listen to how they analyze and problem solve and put a lot of time and effort in accomplishing a goal.
I'd add that all of those things are very, very true and accurate. But I think if we just got sales leaders to focus on, grasp the idea that the most important thing is the will and desire to succeed, instead of looking at a resume and going, okay, call points, general surgery, colorectal, bariatric, these hospitals, okay, you might be a fit. Instead of that, just look at the results of the survey, and if you agree with it, then as you're interviewing and going through the process, there's probably a lot of ways to flesh out that will and desire, but you won't if you're not focused on it.
Right. And then another thing we talked about the other day was, skills necessary in this new world that we live in, a virtual world, so to speak. And I think, Barry, you made the comment that one of the clients recently came back with pretty significant differences in what they were looking for in terms of candidates.
Yeah, so we helped a company at the first of the year pre-COVID with a pretty good size expansion. At the time, they had a profile. I can tell you it was a diagnostics company, and they wanted people with really solid, high-level diagnostic experience. We wound up placing quite a few of them. After COVID, or once COVID started, about 6 weeks ago or so, a few more openings popped up, and I was surprised to learn that the profile had drastically changed. And it went from having diagnostic experience to we need people with relationships in this very specific specialty. And the reason for that is because those people that had relationships have been successful scheduling Zoom meetings and virtual interactions with the customer that allowed them to continue to sell the product, while the person that might just be a superstar diagnostic sales rep would have to be out trying to build those relationships and would probably be very successful at that. But because access became so challenging, they changed their whole profile.
But that could actually end up being a bit of a trap.
Could be.
Because if you focus on the relationships, I mean, there are people that have the relationships, but if they can't close a deal, and I would think that if somebody really had the will and the drive to succeed, and then they had good critical thinking skills, I would imagine
find a way
that they could be trained and pick up the skills to, work virtually and to prospect virtually and so on and so forth. That's interesting, though. It is interesting. So they identified something. They think they're making a good change in the profile, but we don't know.
Well, and 2 years from now, if hopefully COVID's behind us, you might find out that the superstar diagnostic experienced reps are far outperforming the profile that they're hiring for today.
Yeah. Any thoughts, Kelly, before we...
No, just, basically, again, the report card is 3 superstars per team of 10. And always realize when you're narrowing down the field, the odds of you finding a superstar in a very narrow focus just increases. And so basically, good luck. And it takes, it takes the right strategy in a partnership with recruiters to get the right talent to interview.
I agree 100%. Well, this has been terrific. And for everybody that's watching or listening, I guess I would just say that the import of getting the right people on the bus, the right people on the team is so important. And it goes back to really defining a process to get that done and to identify these key characteristics. And if you can do that, you're going to have a lot more success. Yeah.
Completely agree.
Okay. Well, Kelly, Barry, thank you very, very, very much. I think there's other subject matter we can come back to in another podcast, video cast sometime in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you for having us.
Oh, you're welcome. That was really interesting, and I look forward to more surveys coming out of Kelly's team in the future. If you are searching for a superstar, do you know how to identify these traits in the interview process? Kelly and Barry just shared some great ideas. If you believe you are a superstar with strong drive, the will to succeed, and critical thinking skills, does it show up in your performance? If not, have you thought about what's holding you back? If you have a successful sales career and are looking to protect your position, or for a new job, or to move up, do you know how to communicate these traits in the interview process? Make sure you can, and practice communicating. You have lots to think about. Thanks so much for spending time with us today. If you like this podcast and videocast, please recommend it, share it with a friend, rate it, and subscribe. Now go win your week.